soldiers, sailors, and airmen of the Allied Expeditionary Force. You are about to embark upon the great crusade toward which we have striven these many months. The eyes of the world are upon you. The hopes and prayers of liberty-loving people everywhere march with you. In company with our brave allies and brothers in arms on other fronts, you will bring about the destruction of the German war machine, the elimination of Nazi tyranny over the oppressed peoples of Europe, and security for ourselves in a free world.
That is General Dwight David Eisenhower's message to Allied troops on the eve of what would be one of the most pivotal moments of the 20th century, the storming of the beaches at Normandy, which paved the way for the liberation of France and ultimately all of Europe. President Biden is in France this morning, right now, set to deliver remarks in Normandy tomorrow to commemorate the 80th anniversary of D-Day. Joining us now, historian and professor of law at Columbia Law School, Michel Paradis. He's author of the new book, The Light of Battle, Eisenhower, D-Day, and the Birth of the American Superpower. Michel, good morning. It's so great to have you with us. You got a lot of people very interested in this subject around the table, so we'll pass it around. But you got access to archival material that we just haven't seen before. You feel like you know everything about D-Day, especially if you're that interested in it. You read every book, you watch all the documentaries, but tell us what new light you shed on this.
I think the most important light I shed on it was the light on the commander himself. You know, Dwight Eisenhower is this received figure who, you know, has this, he's our grandfather in some ways, and his presidency was certainly defined by being trying to look boring. And the 2 million or more stories that come out of D-Day, the one that I think is the most dramatic and almost relatable to us today is the man at the middle who had to struggle through it all and to project optimism, even though at all times he knew it was on the verge of collapse. That, you know, even on the eve of battle, his chief of staff predicted that there was maybe a 50-50 chance of it succeeding. And had it failed, you know, what world would we live in today?
Right, that's an alternate universe we don't want to contemplate
Absolutely.
at this point. And you get into in the book the planning of D-Day, which it's been well documented. But the fact that they pulled this off, when you really consider it all, it feels almost impossible. You know, there's the head fake that they convinced Hitler they were coming somewhere they weren't. Can you talk about the early stages of the idea and how outrageous it must have sounded to so many people?
It sounded outrageous to most people, most especially the British, who at that point were probably the preeminent empire in the world. And when the Americans came in 1942 and said, here's how we're going to beat Hitler, we're going to cross the English Channel and charge to Berlin, the British were like, no, you're not. We can tell you all the reasons why you can't do that, why it's a terrible idea, and moreover, why I think we're all going to be better off if we start pursuing some British imperial interests in the Mediterranean in the meantime. And so, the plan had been shelved for years, deferred. And finally, at a conference in Cairo in 1943, Churchill and Roosevelt meet for the first time and have essentially a showdown over whether to finally launch this cross-channel invasion. And as a student of diplomatic history, I don't think I've ever read proceedings from a summit that were as acrimonious, where you have 60-year-old men on the verge of a fistfight over whether or not they should continue to pursue operations in the Mediterranean or pursue this high-risk but high-reward operation across the English Channel. And ultimately, a compromise is cut. They decide to go across the English Channel and conduct Operation Overlord. But the first thing that Dwight Eisenhower sees, as both a general and as a student of military history, is it's just way too small. This compromise is shortchanging what they need, and ultimately he has to double the size of the invasion, which becomes probably one of the most sensitive diplomatic things he has to do right as he gets the job. But he ultimately pulls it off, convinces the British to go along, to not only go along with the invasion and support it, but to expand it, and then basically spends the next 5 months getting every detail in place and hoping that everything that he does and that everyone he's leading to do will ultimately come off when the time has come.
So pulling this book together and the research that you did for the book and the research that you had access to, you've got Dwight Eisenhower, a career military man. He knows from the moment that General Gavin and the 82nd jump out at 1, 2 o'clock in the morning, he knows that when they land on Utah and Omaha, there's going to be horrific casualty rate. Yeah. What impact, if any, did that have on him?
It had an enormous impact, and this is one of the things that I think is just so admirable about him, because the night before the invasion, June 5th, he gives the order to go. There are predictions. He's essentially betting on the weather at that point, and he personally goes to see off the 101st Airborne. And he's not even recognized right away. He goes up in a very unmarked car, just starts walking between these young men who are younger than his son, who's graduating from West Point the next day. They're all painted up like in war paint. They look like coal miners after a shift. And he walks from man to man, just, where are you from? What do you like doing? Do you like fishing? And, he makes a point as he shakes each man's hand to look them in the eye. Knowing, and he's been told that anywhere from a quarter to half of them are going to be killed. And he knows that every other hand he's shaking is a young boy who's not going to have a future, but who's there to do what he's ordered them to do, but ultimately to try and save the world. That's literally what was at stake.
We all know the story that Eisenhower prepared the letter about if it had been a failure. What would have been plan B? Just say it hadn't worked. As you said, it was a best of 50-50 call. What would have happened the next day? What would Roosevelt and Eisenhower have recommended? How would the course of the war have changed?
Well, Eisenhower would have been fired, and we would be talking about him the way we talk about General McClellan, probably. But the limits on Allied strategy at that point would be pretty severe. Essentially, the Allies would have to return to the Mediterranean and pursue Great Britain's essentially long-term strategy of expanding Allied influence in Great Britain, using their superior air and naval power to try and strangle Germany, but ultimately leaving the hard ground fighting in Europe to the Red Army. So you would have had a world where Russia was essentially the only counterbalance to Nazi Germany. Whether or not they would have cut a separate piece after seeing the Allies fail so completely, I think is not hard to imagine under the circumstances. And we would be living in just an entirely different world today, with probably the British Empire still as the preeminent sort of power in the world, Russia, maybe even Nazi Germany or some version of Nazi Germany in place for many, many more years, if not decades. Then,
Caddy, so fascinating to hear Michel describe the fight, the discussion between Churchill and FDR in Cairo over whether or not to do this and how to do it, given that Churchill had spent so many years writing literally love letters to FDR, trying to court him to bring him into the war, got him to Lend-Lease, and then ultimately Pearl Harbor gets the United States into the war. But that relationship so central to the story. Yes,
so central. And another relationship between an American and a Brit that was very central was that between Patton and Field Marshal Montgomery, who you saw there in some of those pictures, who was actually my husband's grandfather. Wow. And I wanted to ask you about that relationship, because I think when Eisenhower appointed Montgomery to be the architect of D-Day, it didn't make Patton very happy. And I was wondering whether that they hated each other, let's be honest. I mean, Monty, as Tom would tell you, Monty was a pain in the rear end. He was not a great, he was a sort of martinet-type grandfather at best. But did that relationship, did the difficulties people had, Patton and Monty, make any impact on the planning for D-Day?
Well, it certainly gave Eisenhower plenty of reasons to smoke more cigarettes. He got up to about 3 packs a day as they were approaching D-Day. But Monty, he didn't choose Monty. He actually advocated for a different British general, and Monty was essentially foisted on him. And a moment ago, I spoke about Eisenhower confronting the original D-Day plan, which is essentially too small. And he needed to essentially double the plan, but to do that, he needed British buy-in, and the British were in no mood to expand Operation Overlord. And after Bernard Montgomery is essentially appointed to lead initially just the Canadian and British forces, Eisenhower invites him to his headquarters right after Christmas and essentially gives him a big bear hug and says, Bernard Montgomery, I want you to lead not just the British component of this operation, but the American one as well. Eisenhower, mind you, did not have the authority to make that offer, but he did anyway. And Bernard Montgomery heartily agreed in being the architect of Operation Overlord. And then at that point, Eisenhower said, and don't you think this operation is just a bit too small, certainly for someone like Bernard Montgomery? And so Bernard Montgomery, in essentially December, January of 1944, becomes the face of the expanded D-Day operation, which is ultimately crucial to getting the British buy-in that they need. And again, that sort of political touch that I think we really underestimate with someone like Dwight Eisenhower ultimately ends up being crucial to success.
80 years ago right now, thinking about those young men getting ready to jump out of those planes and go do what General Eisenhower asked them to do. The 80th anniversary is tomorrow. We'll have full coverage of the president's visit and speech there. The new book titled The Light of Battle, Eisenhower, D-Day, and the Birth of the American Superpower. Michel Parody, congratulations. A fabulous book.
Thank you
for
so
being
much.
here.
Appreciate it.